Welcome to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. I'm your host, Casey Garrett, and together we'll be discovering and learning from inspiring voices of healers, medicine keepers, and visionaries. Every episode, we'll explore the world of health, vibrant wellness, and natural medicine for a new era of human society. Welcome to today's episode. All right. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. So today we have a treat for you. So as you guys know, we focus on the micro around here typically. And today we're going to roll into the macro side of this work. So one of the signs to me that things were shifting about a year ago, we had one of our microdosing community calls. One of the newer participants just got started with microdosing. She's like, I think I'm going to try iboga next. Have you heard of that? I heard a little bit about it on YouTube and we were all like, let's take a pause. And fast forward a year now later, it's been wild to watch like how much some of the bigger medicines have come into the popular consciousness. You can see live streams on Instagram now and YouTube. And I really wanted to bring together three experts today who live in the space, live and breathe, and are devoted to the space to really educate us and share some best practices, both for participants who are thinking of exploring these bigger medicines, but also for our microdosing guide community who are increasingly being asked to support the preparation and integrations for these medicines. So please welcome Otto Maier, Victoria Wueschner, and Kyle Buller to the episode today. Hi, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So I'd love to open up to give each of you the floor to share a little bit about your origin story to psychedelics, how they came into your world and kind of led you to the current work you're doing today. So Otto, can we start with you?
Yeah, I can start. So origin story, long story short, is essentially I was having quite a mental health crisis at the time. The life that I had built had fallen apart, including relationships, career, et cetera. And I was at a point in my process where therapy and spiritual practices, things I was really devoted to, where I was running up against a wall where they weren't really helping me to the depth that I needed. And I felt really I was really lucky that I had found ayahuasca. That was my first medicine that I had sat with, and it changed my life. It changed my life deeply, and it brought me out of a pretty serious suicidal ideation that I was struggling with for a prolonged period of time, and something that no other modality could help me with. So my origin story is that I usually say that ayahuasca saved my life. And then from there, I felt pretty devoted to wanting to give back in some way to having that my life given back to me. And then from there, it's just slowly become a process of, being of service in whatever way I can be.
Beautiful. And today you are with a Tandava team, right? Yeah. Can you share a little bit about how you two intersected?
Yeah. So I have a private practice that's based in a few different modalities: depth psychology, internal family systems work, somatic work, a little bit of animism, shamanic work as well. I work with people one-on-one, do many different offerings. And then I also do integration for Tandava as well as for 5 as well. So that's our little intersection.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Victoria, how about you?
Yeah, origin story. So I found psychedelics very early, which I'm very happy about. It changed my life, but it changed the trajectory of my life in such a big way because I found them so early. It was about 15 years ago. I was 19 or 20, something like that. And yeah, I mean, it kind of came in 2 chunks for me. and I guess I'll give a little bit of a background. I was born and raised in a really small town, really focused on like oil field money and things like that. And so growing up in that space, my town was overrun with addiction and drugs and all of these things. And everyone in my life fell into that. And I felt really like my life was in a black and white zone where this can't be all there is, really. Just feeling really like, what more is there? How can I find more? And yeah, in that moment, I found a music festival. I went to the music festival, as many of us do, and found this ceremony of play, which is interweaved with psychedelics. And then right after that, which really opened up everything for me. A whole new world was out there, new people, the life had color again. And really shortly after that of, getting to meet new people and have these experiences, I heard about ayahuasca. And it was an interesting thing to tell my parents at that time. I'm 19, I'm going to the jungle to go and do this thing nobody at that time really knew too much about. They were very worried about it. But I went and I had this experience. And just like Otto said, it changed my life. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. And really all I wanted to do after that was, go deeper, learn more about the medicine and dedicate my life to service. And allow other people in some way, wanted to figure out a way to help other people find the color in life again.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, guys. Let's see, my origin story. I had a pretty traumatic snowboarding accident when I was 16. So I was a sophomore in high school. And make a long story short, I ended up rupturing my spleen and lost about like 5 to 5.5 pints of blood internally. So that experience really shook me in a big way. I remember kind of laying in the CAT scan machine as I was slowly drifting off, and the doctors kept telling me to not fall asleep. And I just heard a voice saying, you're going home, relax into this experience. And the more that you struggle with the experience, the harder it's going to be. I remember just feeling all this bliss and love and thinking, this is what we all wait for. This is awesome. But coming back from that was really challenging, especially at such a young age when you're forming your identity and, being a teenager. And I fell into a pretty heavy existential crisis, a lot of depression. Otto, kind of resonate with you, like bringing up the suicidal ideation. Thought about that pretty much every day. And it was pretty much this idea that I wanted to go back home. This world felt really difficult to be in. And what I felt during that near-death experience was, oh no, like that's where I should be. Like I shouldn't be here. So I really struggled with, I guess, like the return. And, I didn't have like this traditional near-death experience where you hear people say they, meet their ancestors or something like that, and they make the conscious decision to return. I felt like I did go somewhere, and I kind of make the analogy that like after that near-death experience, I like woke up with a map on my chest, and it was like my new reality, and I had to like navigate it myself. And so I think it was like 3 years later, I was around, I think 19. And a friend of mine decided that we'd go out and eat some mushrooms in the woods. And I had a small experience before that. I think it was like with like a half a gram or something. And I remember feeling like pretty good with that experience. It like kind of opened me up a little bit. But didn't really prepare me for this experience. And we just went out into the woods, and I think I ate maybe around like 2 grams. So, and I relived my near-death experience in like a pretty unique way. And it helped me to, I guess, confront that return story. And it made me feel more confident and like almost had some sort of resolution. And I remember coming back from that going like, how could we ingest something that grows from the earth that could replicate death? And I just became so fascinated by it. I just started digging into all the literature. And then I think I heard Terence McKenna talk about the self-transforming machine elves. And I was like, holy shit, other people have seen these things too? Because that experience included like this entity encounter. And so I just became fascinated, decided to, dedicate my life to studying consciousness and psychedelics. So I found a little unique school called Burlington College. Unfortunately, it shut down in 2016. But I was able to do a lot of independent studies in psychedelics, got trained in breath work and did all sorts of stuff. And then so I met Joe Moore around 2015, and then we launched Psychedelics Today, ironically, as Burlington College was closing. So it felt like a weird death and rebirth experience there. But yeah, that's my origin story.
Beautiful. I have known that story for years, but it's the first time I've heard you speak it out. And it lands different. So yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Lots and lots of our listeners have only had experience with psilocybin and microdosing, or they're just contemplating microdosing for the first time. So once they kind of step into this world, as we know, it's kind of this Pandora's box of what is available now, very different than even just a few years ago in the field and space. So for people who are just stepping in brand new, who kind of see the offerings of the bigger medicines of 5, of ayahuasca, what are some of the things that you would love to share now with all your experience behind you for people who are brand new to medicine practice? If they're drawn to work with an ayahuasca or a 5, what are some of the things you would love for them to reflect on and be aware of before they take the next steps? Otto, you want to start off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things that really stick out in my mind. The first is that working with a bigger dose, particularly in a retreat setting, is much more of a process than an event. And I think that if you're going into this thinking that it's going to be an event, a healing event, and it's going to be contained to this one moment, this one journey, as opposed to something that can really open up a much larger process that can potentially last for months to a year, I think that is the orientation you have to have coming into this work. That's how I feel, is that you are inviting yourself into a transformative process. And that process may have many phases, many seasons to it, and that there's not anything particularly wrong with that. That's just how these medicines work, is they work in a process. As opposed to sometimes I think maybe the media or the marketing or even mental health marketing in some ways is maybe more event-based or symptom management-based, as opposed to, hey, you might feel overwhelming terror, for example, in your journey. And that might be something that is asking you to go deeper into something, into a process, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That is just an orientation that the medicines offer, which is something that is more akin to the hero's journey, a journey, as opposed to something that's going to make us feel better. So that's the first thing that I always tell people is going into this bigger dose work is less about feeling better per se, and more about going into a process and into a journey. So that was the first thing. And then I think the second thing that is really important is to do your homework and research, because unfortunately, the way the space is set up now is there's a lot of bad actors, and there's a lot of spaces that you're not going to be safe in. And unfortunately, the consumer needs to be very educated in order to know that they're in the right hands. And then maybe a little piece of that too is not every container or medicine or experience is the right fit for everybody, right? So finding the right fit is also a really important piece to all of this work.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Victoria, would you like to add anything?
No, I think, the main thing that I was hearing was around the safety aspect, which I think is such an important aspect to focus on. I think a lot of people who are new to these big medicines, especially I'm thinking 5, because that's the field that I come from, they don't quite know what to look for when they're researching, right? They have these beautiful microdose experiences, they're seeing the benefits, and they get really eager and excited to jump on the bandwagon of having big experiences. But what are the actual questions that we need to be asking? What do we need to be looking for? What does safe actually mean? And so I would just say some of those things are, of course, making sure that there's emergency protocols in place. There's preparation and integration, especially in the big experiences. There has to be preparation and integration included in that. I think that's key. Making sure our facilitators are experienced. And I'm sad that I have to say this, but not just experienced in like serving the medicine, but sitting with it. It's themselves. Because there's a lot of people out there right now serving medicine, 5-MeO I'm talking about specifically, that they have never had a 5-MeO experience, but they're actually serving 5-MeO DMT. So just making sure that people have that experience, that there's no malpractice allegations out there, they're participant focused, and that there's some type of team that can, like Otto was saying, it might not be the right fit, the container, right? Making sure that it is in terms of, okay, does your facilitator have the skill set for what you're coming to them for? And if they don't, do they have the team that has that skill set? I would say that those are kind of some of the things they'll want to be looking for.
Fantastic. Kyle, would you add anything?
I'd go back to the basics, like what is somebody's intention for really wanting to like jump in to do this stuff? Because I think, as you guys have mentioned, like, it's like the train to jump on, the bandwagon to jump on. And Casey, when you were mentioning like a client getting into like iboga, I remember like back in the day, I mean, there was like a protocol to step your way up to that, right? Like I remember everybody was like, you just don't jump into iboga even though you're really interested in it, right? Like start at the basics, right? And then start to like work your way up. And so, it might not feel as sexy to like start with those basics and really start to like, work on the foundation, work on those intentions. What are some somatic tools, mindfulness tools that you can start to work on, and get curious about your own process, right? Because Otto, as you're saying, it's a process versus like this event thing. So I think it is important for one to get, start developing that relationship with the process beforehand, instead of just viewing it as like, I'm going to go do this big thing, it's going to change my life. Sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't happen, right? Sometimes it can actually create more destabilization in somebody's life when they're not ready for it, if their nervous system can't hold those big experiences. So, I think the more I've been doing this work, I'm like, how do we start with the foundational skills first, so we can really go deeper and be ready for it?
Yeah, beautifully said. I know in my experience now, we're in our 6th year of microdosing support, and there's a huge difference now. So when I was first starting out this work, like people had to seek it out a little bit, right? It was very much people had to look for it. And so it was a certain kind of person, right? Somebody who had done quite a bit of work, typically done many other modalities, had done therapy in the past, had done some exploration, some contemplative practice. Now it's a whole different story. And so I find myself now, sometimes people aren't even ready for microdosing yet. We might do some breath work first. We might do some nervous system regulation. We might do some grief and trauma work first for a month or two before they even start microdosing. So I find meeting people where they are and asking different questions now than I asked a few years ago. So along those same lines, like when you guys are preparing people for these bigger experiences, what are some of the preparation processes that you see are really helpful? And maybe what are some of the questions that you might ask someone to inquire of themselves to test for their readiness to work with medicine so powerful? Otto, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. I really love this question, especially because I think culturally we can see we're very materialist. So we tend to see the material of the medicine as this active agent in something I'm looking for, right? Like I'm going to get something from this substance per se. Where if we're process oriented, in the preparation, we can start to already get a sense of how someone is going to respond to the process, right? So my first orientation is what is this person's attitude? I would say, as more depth psychology, towards their unconscious. How are they relating to the material that is already present in their psyche and the things that want to come up? For example, if someone has an intention to deal with their anxiety. I want to sit with mushrooms because I'm anxious. My first question is, well, how do you feel towards your anxiety? Is the question, I want to get away from it. I want it to go away. Or I feel open and curious to going towards it. So my first orientation with preparation is always some version of a little bit of a confrontation. I want to be a little confrontational with the material that might bubble up. So just gently inviting a confrontation with what's already available, because in seeing how this person responds, how much capacity, how much somatic capacity they have to be with that confrontation, because this medicine is going to be potentially very confrontational. It might submerge you in the roots of that anxiety, right? To get you to move through it and past it. So that would be my first orientation, is helping this person find the resources that allows them to turn towards the thing that they're trying to work with.
Thank you. Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, it's along the same lines as what Otto was talking about. One of the most important things that I'm checking for when somebody's coming to do this work is what their attitude is towards the process. Is there a willingness there? Is there a willingness to get into, we say like the muck, to pull the muck boots up and really like get into the cave and look at the cobwebs, look at the monsters. And yeah, we've found, it's really interesting. We found, especially with 5, because people ask like, should I start small and work my way up, which is totally fine and okay. But we found it less to be about somebody's psychedelic resume and more to do with the attitude towards the experience, that I'm super happy that if I have a blissful, beautiful experience, that's okay with me. And I'm equally as okay with this being challenging. And I mean, I think that there's also a note for the facilitator and their ability to be able to really reframe the challenging experience to folks and say, hey, this can get a little bit challenging. And this is why the challenge is good and why it's transformational. Are you okay? Do you consent to that? So yeah, I think that that's a big piece there. And then also as well as like, looking at the different, as a facilitator, looking at the different types of folks that are approaching you. If you have somebody that's approaching you to do trauma work and to like really, really get in there, is making sure that they're not stepping into that work for the very first time, right? That they've been working with a therapist. For example, I work with a lot of women with sexual trauma. It's not their first time looking at that sexual trauma. And they've been kind of doing that work beforehand. And so when we get in there, like we can really get in there and it's not going to be a shock to the system. So yeah, I would just say those are some of the things that I'm definitely looking for in the prep process.
Perfect. Kyle?
Yeah, I always like to, on top of everything that you guys have said, I always like to incorporate like breath work into it as like a little session on seeing how like we can hold like tension without medicine. And so sometimes I would actually like do little breathwork sessions beforehand to just see what activation looks like and see how people can like hold and tolerate activation in the nervous system, and other things like mindfulness and different meditations and stuff like that. And a lot of somatic practices and awareness, again, just kind of seeing how they deal with things when they go outside their window of tolerance instead of just pushing them into the deep end. I kind of see it as like, I used to lifeguard. So learning to swim, right? Like we just don't want to push somebody into the deep end. I've definitely been there before and it's not fun. And maybe that's also where my hesitation comes from. Like, well, I learned a lot from that, but if I were to do it again, I'd probably want to learn how to like, put the swimmies on and wait around a bit more. So yeah, therapy if folks don't have a therapist or a coach to work with. And I like this process-oriented approach that you guys are bringing up too. It makes me think of something Arnold Mindell said, like, how do you become so fascinated about your process? Whether it's a good process, a bad process, a neutral process, like how do you become interested in whatever's unfolding there without always trying to label it as good or bad, but, trying to become curious of like where it leads to. And then one other kind of assessment question I like is, learned this one from a friend, Deanna Rogers. Are you in a place where you can shake the ground? And, I think a lot of folks aren't thinking about where they are at in their life, what support systems they have in their life. Sometimes people are in that desperate state to just shift their state and emotions. And, sometimes it is really important to be like, can I shake the ground right now? Like, do I feel stable enough to have a mini little earthquake? And if the answer is yes, like, yeah, that might be an okay time. But if the answer is no, you don't have good support systems, there's a lot going on in your life, maybe it's not a great time to really kind of shake things up. And people sometimes don't think about that, right? Because they see like, oh, I just need to do this now to do the healing work. But again, kind of coming back to some of those foundational things, there's things we can do to like create sturdy legs, create that sturdy foundation to shake the ground.
That was gold, you guys. Yeah, all three of you. Thank you. Super helpful. The next question I have is a little bit more oriented toward all the guides who are listening. So I wanted to share a reflection of the way this plays out that I have seen in my own practice. So I was introduced to a gentleman who had come to do a psilocybin journey. He was brand new to psychedelics. He had very little therapy before, and he was put on an antidepressant and was having some side effects that he didn't like. And so he was told that doing a journey could help him taper quickly off of this antidepressant. And this gentleman was a CEO of a large public company. He was an investor. He had thousands and thousands of people that he was responsible for, their livelihoods and work. He had a family. He had a lot of responsibility in his personal and professional life, both. And he went into this high-dose psilocybin experience, and he was taken back to his childhood. He was 4 years old again and receiving the abuse that he had experienced from his father. And it pointed to the anxiety he later felt as an adult, but it also pointed to the drive and the motivation that was behind all that he had achieved in his life. And all within a day of that single experience, it took all of his drive, ambition around this life that he had built from that place out from under him. And he wanted to quit his company. He was shutting down his investment fund. He wanted to file for divorce. And he came to me and he said, "Can you put me back together again?" And that's what can happen. It's like we go into these experiences thinking they're just going to help us get off my SSRI, right? And we can open this portal to our earliest wounds and really discover kind of the foundation that we have built our lives upon. And so as a guide, receiving these clients, especially those who are working with microdosing, can be very unfamiliar, right? Because of microdosing tend to invite big honesty and big truth, but kind of in bite-sized pieces, right? So it's easier to absorb and integrate these awarenesses when they come up in our dreams, or they come up in conversations, they come up in our body. So I'd love to give time and space to each of you to speaking to microdosing guides and to participants too, who have these big destabilizing experiences of, to use that phrasing, like, how do you help put somebody back together again? Otto, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can. And I love this question, especially because this is like the foundation of my work that I do every day. I would say is work with people who are more in some type of crisis or destabilization after a big experience. It's work that I just adore, just love it. And partially why I love it is because we can work really hard to create these lives that we build around our egos to keep ourselves structurally in some type of integrity. And there's always a root to the soul or the unconscious that raises its hand and says, chronic anxiety, depression, something doesn't feel right, an addiction, something that always has a thread that goes lower into someone's history, someone's soul, someone's depth, someone's unconscious. And like Kyle said, if you're not desiring to unroot that, if you're not, this is where the consent piece is so important. Is like if someone's not really consenting to that, doing that work, that like you really want that foundation to be shooken up, then I think that's a huge piece of being a guide, is offering the consent around informing someone about this is what you might be embarking on, is a journey that's going to take you down into the the depths or the underworld of your personal history. And you might be a little bit shaken up or shocked to find what's down there. It might change your life. You're looking for this big life change. So the question is how to help someone piece their life back together. I think it depends on where they're coming from. It depends on and how they're feeling, right? Because is this person feeling that meaning and connection to what's coming up? Like, oh wow, like this all is all rooted in my history, and they're connected to that child that was experiencing that abuse, and they're interested, right? There's a fascination in their process. Or are they in a grief and denial phase where they're saying, I can't believe this happened, put me back together, put things back the way that they were, right? Like these are two totally different places to be in. So my first orientation is really attune and try to meet this person where they are in their process, right? Because if someone is denying and wanting to be put back together and things to go back, that's a much different position than someone who's dealing with the chaos of this fallout, but is oriented towards having that attitude of I'm following this and I'm listening to that process. Really different.
Thank you. Victoria, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, echo everything that Otto said. And I think that this is where there needs to be a differentiation between, when we talk about the word guide, right? There's facilitators and there's integration specialists. At least in the world of 5, that's how I see it, is that I think oftentimes we lump together, because I facilitate 5MEO, now I'm suddenly an integration specialist, when those are completely different skill sets. As a facilitator ear, when I listen to this, the things that you were talking about, I could look at this form, I could talk to this person on a discovery call, and I could probably have an idea that this person is going to have a challenging time on the other side. And I think the more experience we get, the more understanding as facilitators, the more skill we get, and we can give that consent piece that Otto was talking about. Hey, I heard you saying this, I read this. Just from doing this for X amount of years, I think it might be challenging because of X, Y, Z. Are you open to that? And are you consenting to it? And then, if somebody is coming to you that is, I need you to put me back together, like in that way, I would send that person to Otto. I would send that person to one of our integration specialists and say, all right, this person has skill sets in, somatics, IFS, Jungian frameworks, whatever. And so, I would say that.
Beautiful. Kyle?
Yeah, like everything that's been said. I'm also thinking, obviously, this is a pretty nuanced discussion, really depending where somebody's at. I think when people have these really big destabilizing experiences, they want to make quick change, right? Like we sit there and we look at our lives and say, oh, these are the things that aren't working, so I need to either get rid of the job, leave a relationship, stuff like that. I'm pretty sure all of us have, probably given this advice or heard it, don't make any big changes, right? Try to sit with it. And again, coming back to this depth-oriented process approach, I think it's important for folks to really sit in the cauldron, right? Taking this alchemical approach of sitting and letting the experience stew, right? And I see myself as a person, I don't want to put somebody back together, right? I want them to put themselves back together. I can guide and create that container for that self-exploration, but I'm also really mindful of why are they coming to me, right? Are they looking for advice? Are they looking for me to tell them how to, live their life after an experience? Really try to take that person-centered approach. But I think there's something really difficult about sitting in it. I think about some of the experiences I've had, and I've had to listen to my own advice and go, I'm not going to make that decision. And bring it in, right? Bring it inside, because Otto, as you were saying, there's probably some deeper roots there. I think about an experience I had with ayahuasca in 2020, and I came back from that, and I was going to make some pretty drastic changes with my life. I was going to just uproot everything and just walk away from a bunch of different stuff. And, I was like, I bought like a new website, and I had a totally different thing of what I was going to do. And I had to listen to my own advice and say, what's actually going on here? And there were some deeper issues there, right? There was a deeper inner process going on inside of me, which I was projecting out into the scenarios in my life. And, I'm glad that I sat with it. I'm glad I didn't make those decisions. But in the moment, it sounded like the perfect decision to make. It's like I saw the image, I saw the path forward. And who knows, maybe if I did follow that, maybe life would look a little bit differently. But in this moment, I'm glad I didn't make that decision because, life took me in a different direction, and I'm grateful for it. So, sometimes we do want to make these quick decisions because maybe things aren't working out, but what's actually going on inside, right? Like, is there anger? Is there frustration? Are there ways that we could get into parts work, right? And think about are there certain conflicting parts that are showing up that just want to be heard and seen that you're not giving attention to? And I think that's where working with an integration specialist, a therapist, to do that self-exploration, and really try to tease a lot of that out. Because again, I think sometimes we just want to make those quick changes, and what is it like to sit with it? And I mean, that is a very nuanced thing at times, right? I think sometimes we do get this window of opportunity where we feel more motivated. Maybe it is something that we've been ruminating on for years, right? And we're like, okay, now I finally get the motivation to make that change. And sometimes that can be important, right? So I also don't want to have so much judgment around don't make big changes, but I also just want to invite people to really sit with it. What does it feel like to sit in the discomfort and sit in the fire as this alchemical process stews in your life?
Mm-hmm. This is why guides and integration coaches are important. Yes. Yes, thank you. Beautifully said, all of you. The example I gave was around, being deeply destabilized, but I've also seen people who have unbelievable gifts open and huge spiritual portals open up and abilities open up, psychic abilities, intuitive abilities to speak light language I have seen. And so sometimes that is what we're helping people support and integrate with. So I'd love to just open it up for all three of you to share, what are the things that can happen, on the other side? And especially if you're a guide, if someone's not even aware really what they're moving through from the outside, from a guide perspective, an integration therapist perspective, what are some of the signs that people exhibit after a high dose medicine experience that they could use support moving through? Otto, do you want to start?
I think the first thing is the fact that someone may need support. I think one really good barometer of that is the context of their relationships, which might be difficult depending on the context of how you're coming into contact with this person. But typically, if someone is destabilized to a degree where they need support, one marker is their friends and family are concerned in some fashion, or they're seeing something in them that feels off or out of the ordinary, right? And with that, what I notice is that there's a quality that you can feel where someone doesn't feel like they're fully with you, right? They feel like they're somehow here, but they're also somewhere else. And Mary Louise von Franz would say that this person is submerged in the water of the unconscious, and they like it. It's good. I don't want to leave the water, right? Which can be problematic in a lot of ways, especially if you need to function in your normal life. Another thing that can happen with that submersion into the unconscious is, you can call it, I call it archetypal possession or ideological possession. So people become inflated in a myth or a story or a character or a piece of their journey in some ways. So that's a little bit of that malaise, that glazing over you see, is that they're lost in the psyche or in a mythic quality, as opposed to they're sober and they're really with you and present. So I think the first thing is noticing that someone's struggling to become present with you. And this is where integration specialist is a specialty, is in helping someone actually noticing, why is this person struggling to come back and be present? There's probably a good reason. Usually in these journeys, when people are more destabilized, it's typically because they contacted some type of material in their unconscious that was too much, too fast, too soon. It was some pain or something that was revealed that was almost a shock to the system, like cold water. And so the inflation or whatever we're experiencing as destabilizing is a response to something feeling probably tremendously unsafe, right? So that we want to be privy to that as well and try to help someone find a safe place to be able to come back to their body and back present. But those are a few things that I would make note of.
Very helpful. Thank you, Victoria.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I feel like we could probably have a whole podcast about this question. There's a lot of things that can happen when we're talking about destabilization. Of course, like people could have extreme reactivations, meaninglessness, coming into contact with trauma or unresolved content. One of the things we talk about here a lot with folks is what we call the falling away process. And it's, especially when we've had an experience with 5-MeO-DMT and we merge with that infinite consciousness and we come back into our bodies, there can be a whole renewed sense of how we relate with the world. The way we see it changes, our belief systems, our values. We don't like our clothes anymore, our car, or our friends, or our work. Kind of like the thing you were talking about with that client that you had. And, in one way, this can be liberating, right? Because it's almost like a reorganization of our life that is maybe bringing us into better alignment with who we are. But also it can be really destabilizing. Everything that makes us who we are starts to fall away and we have no idea who we are anymore. And maybe we have no community or support systems who can relate to what we're going through. I would say that's a big one with 5-MeO, but the list of things that can happen with 5 is pretty long, and with the big ones like iboga as well.
Wonderful. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, maybe I'll you brought up like maybe more of the positive qualities, right? So, I mean, that is also something I think people have a hard time integrating when maybe they become more empathetic. They start feeling more, right? That's a really intense thing. If you haven't been feeling and then all of a sudden you're feeling everything, that can create more anxiety or overwhelm and shut down. You're kind of talking about like light languages. I think about folks that might start developing like those psychic gifts, right? Of like, I feel like I'm starting to like hear voices, not in like a psychosis oriented way, but like more of like a telepathy type of way, or more kind of like paranormal way in that way. But like people sometimes have like heightened sense of energy running through the body. We can look at like Kundalini awakenings, where people get like activated and then they don't know what to do. I remember I was working with a client years ago where they had all this energy in their hands and they're like, I can't show up to work anymore. And they like did stuff with their hands and like, it's really intense. Like there's just so much energy and tingling in my hands. I don't know what to do with it. Right. And I forget what that wasn't through psychedelics, but it was like, I think more through like a spontaneous type of spiritual emergence process. But that can be like really overwhelming to then all of a sudden be more attuned to the world, right? Kind of talked about reactivations, Victoria, like, sometimes people do start seeing auras and maybe they get heightened sensitivity to the visual field and maybe they start seeing things a little bit more. And so that all can be really, really overwhelming. And I remember one of the first times I felt heard and seen, I was doing my undergrad and I was taking a class on eco-psychology and the teacher was a shamanic practitioner. And I was like, I got to go up and tell him about my experience with like psychedelics and my near-death experience. And he looked at me and said, if you live in a traditional culture, the elders would have stepped in and taught you this new way of being in the world and this new way of seeing the world. And he's like, unfortunately, you didn't. You grew up in this culture and you had to figure it out on your own. And it makes me think about like, what are some other traditions where they have systems and frameworks for really understanding what is going on, possibly on an energetic level, right? When people do have these awakening experiences and they wake up to new gifts and realities and they're like, whoa, this is overwhelming. Like, how do I go to work when all of a sudden, maybe I'm getting all these intuitive downloads all the time? And that can be really overwhelming, but it's also, I think, a gift that people really, they can start to step into that and maybe into a new path in their life too.
Amazing. All of you. Thank you so much. Yeah. I've seen one of the challenges I know as a guide and facilitator is seeing so many people's process is, especially I hold a lot of space for group experiences, and there's always people in the group, things are happening too quickly. And there's always people in the group that are kind of a little impatient because things aren't happening enough. And they get to see each other being in the same group and see there's pros and cons to both, right? And one thing that I have found that is it's kind of one of the blessings and fascinations and also the challenges as a guide is I have seen over and over the faster somebody is moving, the more destabilization that's happening, the gifts are often coming in at the same time. Right. And so as they are shedding a lot of grief, for instance, like that's when spiritual connection arises. At the same time, they're loosening their tethers to their former identity. They're having this profound connection to the natural world, and all these animals are showing up in their world. And so it happens at the same time, right, is what I'm going to share. So it's knowing how to hold both, I think, as a guide is ultimately, one of the challenges and one of the gifts of this work. I know I get this question all the time, and I'm psyched to hear your reflections, which is, I want to do a journey. I am microdosing. How can I microdose up until the time of the journey? Or does the guide prefer that I stop microdosing in advance? And then part 2 is, I just did a medicine experience. It was incredible. How soon can I do it again? Is number 2. So I'd love for you guys to answer both if you can. Otto.
I will just say, for every question that I answered and will continue to answer, the preface is, it depends.
Yes.
I think with all psychedelic, it depends. It always depends. The context is huge. And I do believe that if my take with a lot of these things is, if anyone gives you a hard and fast rule about like, oh, this is what it is, it's like, this is, for me, I don't think that's the territory of psychedelics at all. This isn't Western medicine. It doesn't work like that. It's not prescriptive in that way. So with that being said, I would say for the first question, I would recommend against microdosing right up until a journey. And the reason my philosophy there is, most people that I've spoken to, their first few journeys typically are the most powerful for them. And why I think that is for one reason is because there's a lot of potential energy. There's a lot of content in the unconscious to emerge, right? There's a lot underneath the surface that can come up, right? And that creates a lot of power and leverage in a process. And so microdosing is great because you get to engage the unconscious, you get to engage with the medicine in this process. But I think if you're working towards a big journey, I think it can be even more powerful to lay off medicine for a period of time to give that journey its proper space to really have a lot of that potential energy build up. In the same way that if you're doing a lot of, for example, like I'll go to the Amazon, do a dieta, you do ayahuasca again and again and again and again, these journeys do build on each other, but there's less of this big process that would come through as you're working with medicine so frequently. And then the second question, doing microdosing afterwards, again, it totally depends on the context and the protocol. For example, I know a lot of people who work with iboga, the protocol is to microdose immediately, right after an experience, and to continue the conversation with the spirit of that spirit of that medicine. Where with something like 5-MeO, maybe not, right? Because you'd be so blown open, right? People are having reactivations and these types of things. I don't think we need to keep leveraging that door open.
Wonderful. Victoria, Kyle, do you guys have thoughts?
Yeah, I think along with Otto, I think it really depends. I do know some folks that microdose, and I also hear some of their doses aren't really, I would say, microdoses because their tolerance is built up. And so I think there probably is that argument to, just pull back a bit in case there is a bit of a tolerance build up there. Because, I've heard people go, oh, my tolerance for a microdose is like 0.5 or whatever. I'm like, is that a microdose anymore? I think, for that. Also, working with different medicines, right? Working with ayahuasca, right? You might want to really stop working with other plants. Otto, what you mentioned, I forget what you mentioned, but it reminded me of an experience after I got back from ayahuasca. I took a small dose of CBD and it brought me right back to that experience, right? And you often hear that ayahuasca can be a jealous plant, and maybe she doesn't want you working with other plant medicines. And so, maybe there's argument there around having those windows of just time integrating. And you said how soon after for other experiences. I think that also really depends, right? It really depends where somebody is in their process. Sometimes people are one and done. That was enough. That gave me enough material to work with. I don't think I'm ever going to touch that again or touch it again in a year. And there's other people that are on a very committed path, right? And they're really called to this, and sometimes they need to go back in. There's also that other idea that maybe you do need multiple sessions to keep breaking open the psyche in a way, if you are really wanting to, go deep in that process. So I'd say it really depends where somebody's at, what their intentions are. I would, maybe if you're a guide, facilitator, integration specialist, looking at that intention, right? Because, we could get into the whole concept of spiritual bypassing and wanting to go back in sooner instead of actually possibly sitting with what's going on. And then we could get in that whole concept of ego inflation and is there actually concern for somebody constantly doing this over and over again very soon? And so, I think those are more nuanced things to look out for.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add here is, when I think about, for the first part of the question of adding microdosing right up into the medicine experience, for me, I just feel energetically, I want to give whatever medicines I'm choosing to work with their own container, their own respect, their reverence. And in that, just making sure that they have space on either side of that. So I always ask people, hey, if you're going to work with 5-MeO, and this goes for before and after, give it its time and space to do its work before we bring in another medicine that might interfere with the process. It will definitely shift it in some way, shape, or form. And then the question about how soon we do medicines afterwards. I mean, I think as humans, we can get a little ambitious, especially if we had a big experience and we want to go back in and, we call that peak chasing. Of course, it feels good and we want to get back there because we like what feels good, right? But I think that there's quite a few different things to consider with that is, number one, have I actually integrated from my experience that I had before attempting to jump into another one? And why? Why do I want to have another experience? Do I want to have another experience because I feel there's actually more there? Or maybe even something new that wants to be worked into? Or is the why more that peak chasing or that ambition of I want to add something else to myself? I need to be better. And if that's the case, I would say maybe put the brakes on and do some internal work into that. There's probably still more content there.
Brilliant. Thank you, all three of you. I'd like to open the next one just in celebrating Victoria. So when I first met Victoria, she was just starting to craft the content for what has become one of the world's leading training programs in 5-MeO DMT facilitation. So just congratulations. It's been amazing to witness you over the last years. Can you share a little bit about the training program for listeners, particularly those folks who are drawn to support others in this work? Can you share a little bit about Five?
I would love to. And thank you so much for your support and your love. That means a lot. It really does. We have a training program. So it's specifically for 5-MeO-DMT. It's a 9-month training program. And what it is really over 8.5 months, we are stuffing our brains intellectually with everything we could possibly need to know to safely and effectively serve 5-MeO-DMT. So over those 8.5 months, our cohort, every week we get a topic. And with the topic, there's over 35 guest teachers and speakers that we're getting content from on recordings, on live calls. And we're, it's everything from mysticism, pharmacology, neuroscience, somatics. The list it's very long. And so the idea is we want to give students as much information as possible. And then what we're doing after we've intellectually stimulated ourselves is the last 2 weeks, we come where I am right now, which is the Tandaba Retreat Center. And we're putting everything to hands-on application. So we're practicing everything from our discovery calls, our preparation calls. We're going over screening forms to really understand who's a good fit, who maybe I should refer out, who maybe is not the right time for them. Our ceremonies, what are the things we need to be talking about in ceremony to make sure that this is a safe space, practicing different routes of administration and dosing. And there's a lot. It's a really intensive 2 weeks. It actually used to be 3 weeks, but unfortunately it's very hard for people to get away for 3 weeks. So we had to get it all into those 2 weeks, but they're really fun and they're really full. And it ends with 2 days of exams at the end, practical and written exams. And the idea there is just, really making sure that as folks are leaving the training program, they feel confident and competent to serve this medicine in a safe way.
Beautiful. And this September will be what number cohort are you on now?
Our fifth one. Yeah.
Wow.
5th year. Crazy. I know.
Congratulations.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Kyle, similarly, I know you guys will have another Vital coming up. This will be what number Vital psychedelic education?
6. Yeah, we just finished up our 5th cohort.
Congratulations. Yeah. Can you share a little bit with listeners about your training, the length, and what it's focused on?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we just wrapped up our 5th cohort and I'm deciding to take a little bit of a breather. It feels like I've been in this pretty big experience for the past few years, running these cohorts. And I feel like I need to do some integration work on it. I listen to all the feedback from all the students and I constantly think about what is the evolution? How does it want to build? What's working? What's not working? So I'm kind of taking the summer to do a little bit of revisioning. But Vital is a pretty broad overview of the psychedelic field. We go over preparation, assessment, navigating the psychedelic experiences, navigating challenging experiences. We aren't drug specific. We're pretty drug agnostic. So we look at all the medicines and talk about all the different perspectives. And then it's a really big focus on integration. And so something I like to say, it's it feels like we're building the scaffolding for psychedelic experiences and psychedelic therapy. I think Vital and what I'm more interested in is how do we build the safety net? People are going to have these big experiences and we need as many people out there to catch folks when, they're having these experiences. So Vital has been specifically really focused on integration and people's own integration process. And so we wrap up towards the end with a capstone project and people are starting to put their experience into a project. And it's been really cool over the years, actually seeing people bring businesses to life, retreats to life, courses, everything. I've just been chatting with some alumni and past graduates over the past few weeks. And one thing I've heard consistently is people really have appreciated the broad overview instead of being so specific, because a lot of people are entering into the field really not knowing what they want to do. And it's been really interesting to see people join Vital and then usually around the 6-month mark or towards the end, it's a usually a year program. Thinking about maybe cutting it down a few months, but they go, I don't know if I actually want to facilitate. And, that is a really interesting thing. And so I think it's a time for folks to really dig into their own process and really figure out how they want to show up. If you asked me 10 years ago, how do I get involved in psychedelics? My answer is go get a PhD in research so you can, work in academia and do research, or become a therapist, right? So like when these medicines come online, you'll be positioned to provide, psychedelic assisted therapy. We're entering a space now where we need folks from all walks of life that are literate in psychedelics. And so I think that's been the big goal of Vital. It's like, how do we bring integration to the forefront of education, their own personal transformation and experiences, and to create psychedelic literacy? So folks that are, we've had folks that have come from like marketing and they're joining Vital, and they've developed like marketing agencies or, projects that are specific to psychedelics. And, us working with various marketing agencies over the year that don't know anything about psychedelics, it's like, oh my God, I need to teach these people about what we're doing, or, there's a lot more avenues to get involved now. And I think Vital has been that bridge of like serving folks that are interested in getting involved in different ways and who really want to focus on the integration process.
Wonderful. Yeah. I can attest and speak to the awesomeness of the Vital crew. I share a lot of students and guides with Kyle in our program too. And yeah, just amazing people, so knowledgeable, so grounded, and also just so kind. They really, really do walk the medicine in so many ways. So I know lots of you listening, that's you. So thank you. Yeah, beautiful. I am so curious to hear your answer to my next question. So when you talk to a lot of guides and a lot of people in the space, and we can look back and go, we stepped into a profession, we created a position for ourselves in the space that is very much what we wish we would have had. Right? In hindsight, when we were moving through our own process. And so for lots of us, it led us to create training programs based on what we were seeing kind of in the greater field. So there has been a lot of growth, a lot of expansion, a lot of cringe over the last year in the psychedelic space. At times, I know a lot of the people I know that have been in the field a long time, the most dedicated people, at times, they're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay in this field because of where it's going sometimes and with the direction. And when we come back to the work and we come back to our clients, I think it's always, that's the centering piece for me. I would love for each of you to reflect, because you've all been in this field and space for some time, seen a lot of things. What are you most excited about and inspired by at this point in the psychedelic, quote unquote, industry and field? And also, what are you most concerned about right now?
I'm super excited that, as psychedelics are becoming more popular, the stigma is starting to really lift. We're seeing it on the news, like people that never would have even thought about doing psychedelics are now curious and interested about it. So what I love so much about that is that psychedelics are becoming more accessible in communities that would have never maybe sat with psychedelics before. And it's going to reach people who really need it, people who are really struggling. I think we can all agree the world is getting weirder by the day. And we definitely need psychedelics. The way that I look at it right now, especially, is like we're in a big, giant pressure cooker in the world, and there's just so much ready to come up and that needs to be worked through and healed and supported and processed. And psychedelics for me are kind of like the pressure valve on the pressure cooker, if you have that, where all the steam comes out. That's kind of how I see it. And in that way, when that little valve is pushed down and all the steam comes out, we can see things more clearly. And it helps us to be able to navigate the world in a way that makes way more sense. So I'm excited about that. The things that I'm most concerned about is just kind of what I was talking about already with the word ambition. So ambition clouding reason. And what I'm talking about is like, as psychedelics are getting more and more out there, people are getting more and more excited to facilitate them and support them. And I think that's great, but it's really important that we're walking before we're running. I can speak specifically to the 5 space because that's the space that I'm in, but the fly-by-night trainings that are like 2 to 3 day trainings, the clinical trials that are moving forward with no preparation and no integration attached to it, the pens that are out there where there's facilitators that are facilitating that have never had a full release experience in their life, or the stacking of iboga and 5-MeO DMT, 5-MeO right on the end of the iboga retreat, and people not knowing what they're getting into because they're trying to, have people get more bang for their buck. These types of things. And so, there's a huge list here. And so I think it's just really important that as we're having psychedelics become more available in the mainstream, which is a good thing, that we're just prioritizing that need for safety above all things, above money, above ego, above desire, and just really approaching it with reverence and respect and getting to know these medicines before we think we know it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kyle, how about you?
The weirder and weirder. I always think about Terence McKenna there. It's going to get so weird. We're going to have to talk about how weird it is. And I wonder what Terence would be saying right now. But when I started to get more of an intellectual interest in this and deciding to go to school around like 2008, and then I decided to do my undergrad in 2010 and telling people I'm going to be like a psychedelic therapist one day. And that's what I'm going to go to school for. And people are like, you're batshit crazy. There's no career in that. And now we're here, and I think everything that, us folks in the industry, the field, whatever you want to call it, it feels like it's becoming more of a reality. And as Victoria was saying, right, like the stigma, the taboo is starting to drift away. It's starting to feel culturally embedded. And that's exciting. I think it's something we've all been hoping for, but it also happened very fast. It was like a light switch. It was like, whoa, like psychedelics are all of a sudden like the new trendy thing. Whereas like a decade ago, it was like if you talked about it, you're like, am I committing career suicide right now by being open about this? And now it's like, if you're not talking about it, you're not cool or whatever it is. So, I'm inspired and excited about like the cultural embedding of it and people being more open about it. And to Victoria's concern too, like, I think we should also slow down. Let's learn how to walk before running. Over the years, Joe and I have been running Psychedelics Today. The amount of stories we've heard about abuse, misconduct, deaths, everything. It is concerning. And I do see a lot of folks like really wanting to rush to become a psychedelic facilitator because it's the new sexy thing to do. And, not also. And so that's why I always am really fascinated, like in Vital, I feel like it's like, oh, we're almost kind of like a bit of a break check. People like understand the responsibility and like the power of these experiences that, oh, maybe I need to learn more, right? Because these are really, really powerful tools and substances. And so, my concern is like how fast everything is going. And I think just reminding folks, it's okay to slow down. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to, sit there and integrate and not go back and take medicine, day after day after day after day, like sit with your experiences and also slow down and be here, right? I think the one thing that psychedelics have taught me is, and probably my near-death experience is, life's pretty wild. Life is psychedelic. And can we slow down enough to appreciate that? Because, I think a lot of the reason why we're in this crazy mess that we're in the world, we're not slowing down enough to appreciate what we have in front of us. We're always chasing the next best thing and trying to solve problems by chasing the next best thing. But, how do we really just slow down and appreciate what's in front of us? Because it's the only thing we know, and it will go by pretty quick. So Yeah, just yeah, the words that it's okay to slow down. It's, there is the urgency in the field. It's like we want these medicines available because we understand like the immense suffering that's happening, and we understand that these can be tools that can really shift society and help heal. But at what cost too, when we're moving too quick? I guess it's like that saying in tech, move fast and break things. We really don't want to break people's psyches. Like these are really powerful tools.
Thank you. Otto, how about you?
I love this question. I love that Terence McKenna is being brought into the conversation in spirit. I often wonder what he would have to say about what's going on. I think he would have a lot to say. What I appreciate the most about this whole movement is I'm just a huge fan of philosophical cognitive freedom. And just, I think that, Nietzsche rightly predicted that we would enter an era in modernity where we would lose our ground existentially to something that is deeper than just material living. That religion would fail at some point, and we would have this gaping hole that we would have to atone for. And he said famously that God is dead, and what kind of sacred games will we have to invent basically to atone for that missing piece of something transcendent. So I think what's most exciting is that people from all walks of life are having a Gnostic direct encounter with something that is mystical and is transcendent and beyond the cosmology of modern, material explanations about life. And I think that's extremely exciting, that we have a tool that can open up larger conversations and maybe create a broader sense of relationality to consciousness in modern Western life. I think that's exciting in so many different dimensions. What I'm most concerned about, I'm concerned about a lot of things. I'm a little pessimistic about the field. I'm not super hopeful in a lot of ways. I think that my biggest concern is that these medicines will be seen as extensions of therapy only. And I think that's a dangerous proposition because, like we were talking about earlier, I would say they're traditionally shamanic tools, and they can open up people's psyche to a broad spectrum of experiences, including, new gifts and talents and things like telepathy, for example, right? That's a lot more than what you're going to find in the therapeutic room, right? That's a lot more than just healing, right? And these, Terence McKenna would say that there's so much more that can open up when you start to engage with these tools. And so I think there's a big danger in seeing them as, I'm going to use this tool to heal my anxiety, versus I had an experience where I died and met my ancestors, and right, there's this whole other existential component to it. And so for me, that's why I recently created a psychedelic practitioners supervision group with another co-facilitator, because I don't think that there's a lot of this continued sort of support around these elements that go beyond therapy.
Thank you. Love you guys. Thank you so much for sharing today. Appreciate you all. Yeah, I'd love to give you each just a minute to share. Lots of people listen while they're driving to the pod. So those of you who are on the road, where to find you folks. So if you could share your websites, where to find you, and also if you're on the socials, where can folks find and follow you? Otto, do you want to start with you?
Yeah, so my website, I was just looking it up. soulandpsyche.org is my personal work. And then for anyone looking for that supervision group that we started for psychedelic practitioners and therapists, is psychedelicsupervisioncollective.com as well.
Wonderful. And are you not on the socials?
I am, but I usually don't. Professionally, I'm more personal. Yeah.
Good for you.
Social.
Good for you. Victoria, how about you?
we're on all things. So, if folks are looking for the training, the website is 5-meo.education. Our Instagram is 5_meo.education. If you're looking for a 5-meo retreat, you want to go to www.tandavaretreats.com. And then our Instagram is Tandava_retreats. Yeah. And if you want to find me, it's Victoria.Wueschner. Yeah.
Beautiful. We'll put all of these in the show notes too, you guys. If you did capture all that, they'll be listed below the show. So no worries on that. And how about Kyle?
Yeah, if you want to check out Psychedelics Today, you can find us wherever on Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, across all the social platforms, just Psychedelics Today. And then psychedelicstoday.com. If you want to check out Vital, it's vitalpsychedelictraining.com. And then my personal site is settingsunwellness.com. And you can find me on Instagram. I think it's just Kyle Buller _. I do have a Setting Sun one too. So I don't know. I'm all over the place and doing a million things.
Meta keeps us on our toes in this field.
You got to have multiple accounts nowadays in case they shut you down.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, well, thank you all so much. Appreciate and love you all. And thanks everybody so much for listening. We'll see you back in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. Ready to take the next step? Please visit us online at microdosingforhealing.com. There you'll find lots of information about our global community, professional training programs, and upcoming immersions. See you there.